Middle Podcast, the podcast dedicated to the music, movies, and culture of Generation X.
What is up, Slackers, and welcome to another episode of the Stuck in the Middle podcast. I am your host, Jason Eck, and this week, it's all about movies once again. So, last week I talked about superhero movies, and I stopped around the 2000s, which is normally where I stop, because I think of the very youngest Xers when they reach kind of adulthood, right? But the superhero movie craze that's currently happening made me think about, like, my kids. Their classic movies are movies that some of them haven't even come out yet, right? Because they're in their teens. Now, what's interesting is that my daughter, for example, her, like, one of her favorite movies, particularly as a kid, and she must have watched it, I would say 100 times, was Cinderella. The other one that, I don't know why it surprises me, Hercules. She loves Hercules. She's like, that is great. So we know that the kids watch Disney movies, even ones from, prior eras. But what are their classics going to be? I don't know. We talk about all different types of movies, and they certainly like our classics, and ones even before that. They love, black and white era films. If they're good, classic, great. So I'm really curious of what they're going to say when they're 49 years old. What my favorite movie is of all time? It's X, Y, and Z. So I was thinking about by decades, what was the most important era of movies for me? And that was the 80s. Now, certainly the 90s too, but the 80s is this kind of, it's a crossroads for me because it's my childhood, right? So 1980, I would have been 6 years old. Going into 1989, I'm now a teenager, I became a teenager in 1987 or whatever it is. So, yeah, it's kind of interesting. Like, even like 12 years old, like 86, like from that era on, it was, my movies. So what I thought about was, what were the movies that I would have said were my favorite then? And then what I think of now, if I take those same years and I look at the movies that came out, some of my tastes have changed. Or there were movies that I didn't see then that I've seen later on and said, oh, wow, that's amazing. Because there were certainly some things I didn't see, some things I didn't even know existed until much later. And then finally, I have a category that I'm calling just the excluded category. So I'm going to tell you right off the bat, it's usually the big budget franchises, right? I think those are, I don't want to say it's too on the nose, but I mean, some of them are big franchises because of us generationally, but also there's like, they're bigger than anything. Like they are the culture. They're the setters of culture, if you will. So I have to exclude them. However, some of those franchises, if you will, I couldn't resist at least having one or two of them that even now I just have to say, look, it's the thing. Like, this is one of my favorite movies of all time kind of thing. So I have to rate it, I think, fairly, as much as I do think that I play fast and loose in my own rules all the time. But I think you'll know what I mean when I start to get into it. So why don't we jump in to 1980? So in 1980, I would say that my favorite movie then, and you're going to be like, really? And there are reasons for it. Flash Gordon. Now, part of it is because I read the comic strips with my grandfather, and this was a very fond memory for me. So Sunday morning, the color comics. I would sit on my grandfather's lap, and he would read the funnies with character voices, just as he read books to me. There was always, he wasn't great at, like, emulating a female voice, for example, but he would try, to put a little oomph into it, little theatrics into it. And I did the same thing with my kids reading books. And that's where I got it from. Flash Gordon was, one of the funnies. Now, you can say, well, that wasn't when you were a kid. My grandfather had like a book of like classics, and my grandmother made me a scrapbook, by the way, which I have somewhere. She would cut out the Star Wars comic strip every day, and she would put it in order in these spiral notebook binders. I mean, amazing. And then Sunday, you get the color version. I have like 2 notebooks filled with the comics, the Star Wars comics. So anyway, Flash Gordon, it was like the pulp kind of thing, the comic strip kind of thing, the movie serials, which he, talked about when, film was younger, whatever it is. Loved Flash Gordon. And on top of it all, my aunt, who is still a musician, was actively playing piano, like cabaret style kind of stuff at like local restaurants and bars or whatever. And she was a huge Queen fan. And of course, Queen did the soundtrack, or at least the title track for Flash Gordon. I'm not going to try to do Freddie's thing now, but it's Flash, right? It's ridiculous on so many levels, but Flash Gordon was like the thing. Now, one of my favorite movies, and honestly, I had never watched it until I was married, right? So this is 2003, I got married, and her family would always talk about this movie. Now, I knew the 2 leads, but I'd never seen it. Turns out I had seen one scene because it was used as a bit in multiple movies. And I'm talking about The Private Eyes with Don Knotts and Tim Conway as some bumbling detectives. And there's the famous line where the butler says, "Walk this way," and they emulate his walk, like stupid slapstick stuff. And of course, there's the whole thing with Tim Conway and you got to look out for the Wookalar. The Wookalar? The 2 of them are just gold, just absolute gold. So what's interesting is that it wasn't available on DVD. So anyone who is familiar with the Northeast know there's something called the Big E. Now, the Big E is the Northern States Exposition. Basically, it's New England states fair, right? So instead of just one state fair, it's multiple states, and it's held in Springfield, Massachusetts, which is a perfect location, really, if you are familiar with the area. I went there. My kids had never been. And unfortunately, my wife was working that weekend, so I couldn't bring her. And that's a bummer for me because I really wanted her to have the full fair experience. So I took the 3 kids by myself, went and met my stepdad, who was there with a bunch of his crew, and, my kid sisters before she had a kid, and, her boyfriend at the time was her husband now. And I just went, and we went into this one area where they have a lot of custom shops and like handmade stuff and tchotchkes. It's a fair, right? Lo and behold, what do I see? A DVD copy of The Private Eyes, which I then bought and brought home for my wife, and she was super stoked. So what is excluded from 1980? Empire Strikes Back. I can't include it because it would just, the whole list of the 80s are going to be these big tentpole things, right? It just wouldn't seem fair. Particularly when I did the episode about the summer blockbusters. It's all Spielberg. It's all Lucas. It's all stuff like that. So that's why that's the first exclusion. So I think you know kind of what I'm getting at here. So in 1981, definitely, and it was almost the same, my then and now. Okay. Time Bandits, Terry Gilliam of Monty Python fame, and a time traveling story with a bunch of dwarves, and they're dwarves who are thieves across time, and it is amazing, and an all-star cast. You get Sean Connery, for goodness sake, and tremendous. If you've never seen the Time Bandits, please do. I mean, Katherine Hellman is in it. It's just so good. And my kids watch it like, what did we just watch? Because there's also really grandiose themes in there. So that's kind of the thing with Terry Gilliam. He packs a lot of stuff into movies. And Time Bandits is no different. So good, so fun. And I think it holds up. That's why I was like, maybe that's my now. Now, the reason that it's not is there was a movie that I probably saw around then. And it maybe should be, when you hear The Excluded for 1981, you'll know why. But there's another, it is a franchise, but it's a little different because each one of the films in the franchise might as well be a completely different story or universe. And that holds true today because there are still entries in this series. But there's not a linear story, if you will. It's not just picking up where you left off, right? Empire Strikes Back picks up right after the end of Star Wars. And so on and so on. So I'm talking about 1981's The Road Warrior, which is, of course, the second entry in the Mad Max franchise, which is Mel Gibson, of course. And this was and is an influence on multiple elements of culture. From everything from pro wrestling, you have the Road Warriors, Hawk and Animal, oh, what a rush, to Demolition, The Powers of Pain, Lord Humongous, which is just ridiculous. This articulate but beast of a man, right? It's just a classic for so many reasons. And what's reminiscent, with George Miller is the Fury Road is having these grandiose chases. So, of course, with the Road Warrior, it is a modified train. Amazing. But you also have the helicopter, the gyro pilot, and his little kid. Dad, what dad mate? Great stuff. Enough humor on top of all the gravitas. What's excluded? Raiders of the Lost Ark. I mean, come on. Raiders of the Lost Ark. And why? I know why. It's dollars and cents. It's always dollars and cents. But do we need another entry in the Indiana Jones series? Maybe there's something about it that's going to bring his journey to an end. I don't know. Maybe he dies at the end. And I don't know that for certain. I don't know if there's a spoiler, if I've just, accidentally stumbled into the death of Indiana Jones. But there's got to be some closure because Harrison Ford has said, it's done. And Steven Spielberg said there will be no other actor. Now, you could have gotten, oh my gosh, one of the Reservoir Dogs, not the Reservoir Dogs. Oh my gosh, Boondock Saints, Sean, I did it without looking it up. Sean Patrick Flannery. He was young Indiana Jones. So some people be like, well, no. That was River Phoenix. No. Sean Patrick Flannery was on the TV show, the series version of young Indiana Jones. I mean, he could do it. He kind of still looks like that, right? But nevertheless, that's not what they're going to do. So that's why it's excluded. Now, 1982, definitely then. And there was a lot of stuff on the list from 82. And it's not a good movie, but it's Disney and it's video games. It's Tron. So I know there have been a sequel to Tron, but that original Tron, right? I mean, first of all, it's Jeff Bridges, right? That's all you really need to know. And I guess it was early rotoscoping or a form of rotoscoping, and it was visually amazing. And I believe that the big bad in Tron, hold on, let me see if I have this right. I might not. It's very possible. So Tron, the original. Oh, that's right. Bruce Boxleitner from, the Captain and Mrs. King, something and Mrs. King. Who is the big bad in this? Because I have a feeling. Is that it? Master Control Program is voiced by David Warner. Yeah, David Warner. So David Warner, I believe, yes. So he was also the big bad in Time Bandits, right? Perfect. Like the 80s, magical time. So what ends up being now? It was not my favorite movie as a kid, only because legitimately it was one of the first movies that made me realize, because again, I saw a lot of stuff way too young. I think many of us did. It gave me an additional sense of mortality, but also that humans could die in the most heinous ways. So this was a retroactive, hey, this movie's brilliant because I was watching it with more mature eyes. Eyes being the key here. Blade Runner, 1982's Blade Runner. So again, I mentioned with Raiders of the Lost Ark at one point on one of the other episodes. I think it was the Blockbuster episode that pretty gruesome, right? But you look at it now and it seems kind of hokey, the whole face melting thing at the end. But you have to imagine Harrison Ford is Han Solo and Indiana Jones. So all of his fare, for the most part, has been, if not kid-friendly, certainly family-friendly, that PG-13 range, right? So this is also science fiction. I think there was kind of a misunderstanding that this was a hard R. A lot of themes, a lot of violence. And there's, of course, when Rutger Hauer's character, Ed, is it Ed? I always get this wrong. He is the replicant. Rutger Hauer, who's brilliant, by the way. And his character, Roy, not Ed, Roy Batty. I was going to call him Ed Batty. I was thinking Ed Gein, the serial killer. Anyway, so Roy goes to his creator, his father, and spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen Blade Runner, he takes his thumbs and pushes them through his father's eyes back into his head. How gruesome was that? So it wasn't exactly my favorite movie as a kid. That was a slow burn that later on I'm like, wow, there's a lot going on in this movie upon rewatch. And also Daryl Hannah scared the hell out of me in that movie. What was excluded? E.T. I mean, it's just E.T. So again, Spielberg, Lucas, those are the exclusions so far. Oh my gosh, you'll hear it in just a minute. Okay, so 1983. Then Trading Places. Also probably shouldn't have seen that. Now Trading Places. For 1983, looking at everything that was released at the time, Trading Places is fantastic. It holds up. It is as relevant today as anything that you can imagine because there's that Wall Street component, the ability to make and break people, and how the wealthy, the uber wealthy, can kind of just toy with people because they're in positions of power. And Eddie Murphy, Dan Aykroyd, Jamie Lee Curtis, I mean, fantastic cast. And the two older guys, Hugh, I'm forgetting his name, but they just remind me of, the two dudes up in the Winchester, Warfield, the two guys up in Muppets in the box. That's who they remind me of. I think that's probably who they were based on or something. Anyway, it holds up. It's so good. It's great. Anyone who hasn't seen Trading Places, you should just, this weekend, just put it on. I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised about how well it does hold up. And how, Eddie Murphy was really just starting out as an actor and is really, really good. This isn't just some SNL sketch, which is also what's kind of great is that Dan Aykroyd also being a Saturday Night Live alum. Perfect. What's excluded? Return of the Jedi. Notice a theme here, huh? Empire, Raiders, E.T., Return of the Jedi. Wait till you get to 1984. So 1984 was the hardest year for me to kind of whittle it down and like really think about what do I watch more than once? What do I watch like once a year, once every couple of years? So then, movie I must have seen every year, and as soon as like VHS became available, The Last Starfighter. The Last Starfighter was great. And was it Robert Preston? But I'm forgetting the name of the young man who was in it. I really think that's about all he did. I can't think of much else that he was in. I know there's something else. It's not hitting me at the moment. So Lance Guest is best known for a starring role in 1984 as The Last Starfighter. So that is really all there is to it. He was in Halloween 2, How to Be in Pictures, The Last Starfighter, Just the Way You Are, Jaws: The Revenge. It gets worse from here. He had a documentary, In Search of Tomorrow, must be about like futuristic movies or whatever, and some, TV work, really all through the 2000s, and then kind of a big break. But nevertheless, I really loved that movie. And it was the first time I kind of got a glimpse of, well, a certain thing that I wouldn't have expected was a thing. And that is when the young lady, Catherine Mary Stewart, I believe is the actress's name, sticks her tongue into the ear of the android. So again, spoiler alert. And I'm like, whoa, that's a thing that people do? They put their tongues in each other's ears? That's an erotic thing? What is that? But also, again, video games. So like Tron, it's like capitalizing on the fact that video games are now a multi-million-dollar industry. And now fast forward, billions and billions of dollars in video games. This was still an early industry, if you really think about it. So The Last Starfighter checked off a lot of boxes. You get video games, you get like the teen movie, you also get like this kind of Star Wars, except it's like humans in space. It was great. And I do think the movie holds up, but how can I, looking back on it, not say that Ghostbusters was superior? I don't know what it was for my age, but Ghostbusters was like, okay. I think a lot of the humor probably went over my head. I didn't realize how bawdy it was. And I wasn't a particularly naive kid when it came to that stuff, but Ghostbusters hits on so many different levels and is far scarier than I remembered it. So I watched it again not even a year ago, probably like 3 or 4 months ago, I think in part for research for one of the episodes. And it's tremendous. It really is. Exclusion, Temple of Doom. There you go. Another Spielberg, Lucas, right? But these are some of the other movies in 1984. Conan the Destroyer, like peak Schwarzenegger, right? People go, no, it's not peak. He's not peak until like 90, 91. Beverly Hills Cop, you now have the big movie star of Eddie Murphy. Footloose, Kevin Bacon, of course. Gremlins, saw that in the movie theater. Was it a Christmas movie? Was it a horror movie? Was it a kids movie? What was Gremlins? What space was that occupying? I'm not quite sure, but it got pretty hairy. And of course, The Karate Kid was 1984. I could very easily put Karate Kid on the list of then and now, or then with Last Starfighter, but I always lean towards Last Starfighter. Karate Kid, fantastic. But 1984, that's tough. And I've only mentioned like a few of the notable ones. If I just gave you like the top 10 movies of that year, you're going to go, holy cow. 1985. So I'm not going to get into why. And it wasn't even right then when it came out in 1985, but somewhere around 88, 89. Well, let's say 89. That movie was my favorite movie for like a couple of years, even into the late 80s, early 90s, for reasons. But now, I watched it so many times back then too. But again, performances that you don't appreciate, I think, fully until you look at it with adult eyes. And that's Clue. Clue was really clever. And people are like, well, it's not that great a movie. No, it's off a board game. It's about the performances. I mean, you think about that cast. So, of course, Tim Curry right off the bat, right, can take anything and make it really good, right? Just based upon performance. He could be comedic. He could be romantic. He could be frightening. He could be so many different things. And that's what really makes a great, I think, performer. But this is directed by Jonathan Lynn, co-wrote a script with John Landis, Eileen Brennan, Tim Curry, Madeline Kahn, Christopher Lloyd, Michael McKean, Martin Mull, Leslie Ann Warren, Colleen Camp. I mean, you have some fine comedic actors as well as those who have done dramatic roles. It's killer. No pun intended. It holds up, and the multiple ending scenario. So I remember it being such a big deal. And I remember my aunt saying this. Depends on the movie theater that you went to, and it depended on what showing you went to. You got a different ending. So that was a gimmick, to be sure. But then, though, like when you got the VHS version, they play all the different endings and all the different scenarios. And it's all on Tim Curry to deliver it. So that in of itself makes it a masterpiece. I don't care what anyone says. What did I exclude? You can be like, well, wait a minute. You included The Road Warrior, but you're excluding Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. I am a little bit. Because now it's... You could have put Mad Max and The Road Warrior and not even called it a sequel in some ways because it was so tonally different. Like, Mad Max is a dark movie. There's not levity there in the way that Road Warrior did, right? Same thing with Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. That's more of just a popcorn movie of all the movies in the entries, right? When he goes and he's like, has to check in at the city there, and he's taking out weapons and more weapons and more weapons and more weapons and more weapons. Now, it fits the character, but it's also for comedic effect, right? So I'm putting it as an exclusion because that was kind of a different realm of Max. Because you also have Mel Gibson now, super duper star. 1986, then Pretty in Pink. It was all about the John Holmes stuff. Not John Holmes. John Hughes. John Holmes makes completely different movies than John Hughes. Oh, gosh. Anyway, yeah, Pretty in Pink with John Holmes is a completely different movie. Nevertheless, I remember going over, there's these two kids that lived across the street from my grandparents. And when I would go over my grandparents on the weekends or whatever, and I got to be friendly with them, ended up turning out badly because they're this terrible neighbor that hated me, this vicious girl. But anyway, I would go over their house and watch movies. And that's the first time I saw Pretty in Pink. And I was totally crushing on the girl that was over there. She's a little bit older than me. So like her brother was my age. She was like a year older or whatever. But anyway, totally crushed. Watched Pretty in Pink over there like a million times. It's the first time I also heard Big Audio Dynamite and Pure Prairie League. I don't know. Weird stuff. Now, didn't appreciate it. I now watch this definitely once a year. Big Trouble in Little China. Just John Carpenter. Kurt Russell. I mean, what is not to love? Kim Cattrall is in that. It's great. It's just great. Oh gosh, and who's the bad guy? Xiaomei, right? He was the guy to be like the bad Asian guy in all these movies at that time. And he was so good at it. But he could also play like other roles, like definitely a character actor. He could be like the kindly grandpa or the, crazy mean guy. James Hong. So James Hong, his character was Lo Pan, who was cursed by Emperor Qin Shi Huang? Is that Qin Shi Huang? Anyway. Dennis Dunn as Wang Chi, Jack's best friend and restaurant owner, who is kidnapped. His fiancée is kidnapped by Lo Pan. Oh, it's so stupid, but also not, it's a John Carpenter movie. One of the things that, probably could have made the list, and I'd have to go back and look what year, might have been, 82, I want to say, was Escape from New York. Just the Kurt Russell, John Carpenter, The Thing. I mean, their collaborations, excellent, always excellent. But Big Trouble in Little China, it holds up in the most absurdist of ways, and that's what makes it so appealing. Excluded Crocodile Dundee, because that was like almost a cultural phenomenon. You know what I mean? Like Paul Hogan became and Linda Kozlowski became tabloid fodder, hugely popular. I wonder what that guy's doing now. Does he have any latter era filmography? other than just that's the character that he created. I can't think of him in anything else. He was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay and won the Golden Globe Award for Best Actor for his performance as Michael Crocodile Dundee. No kidding. Isn't that strange? It's also strange that he married his first wife in 1958. They got divorced in 1981. And they got married again in 1982 and got divorced in 1989. All right, filmography. Paul Hogan Show. Apparently that was some kind of variety show in Australia, I imagine. Fatty Finn as the delivery man. Let's see. Crocodile Dundee 2, Almost an Angel, Lightning Jack. I do remember Lightning Jack. Oh, he did a remake of Flipper, Crocodile Dundee. Strange Bedfellows, Charlie in Boots, That's Not My Dog, The Very Excellent Mr. Dundee. Okay, well, that's that. So basically, it's Paul Hogan as Paul Hogan and Lightning Jack and Crocodile Dundee. End of list. 1987. The Lost Boys. The Lost Boys. And I almost thought that was going to hold up, but I was really looking through the list. And a movie that I didn't appreciate at the time. I think in part because I'm somewhat like Fred Savage's character. Oh, Grandpa, I don't want kissing. It's gross. I don't like romance. The Princess Bride. I dismissed it as a chick flick. And gosh, I was missing out. Rob Reiner, Carrie Elwes, Carrie Elwes, Robin Wright, Christopher Guest? Yeah, it's great. Mandy Patinkin, Andre the Giant, Billy Crystal, Carol Kane. No, Carol. I always second guess myself. But it's so interesting because, Rob Reiner, of course, did Spinal Tap. And he has a couple of his recurring actors. So Chris Sarandon was the other one I was thinking of. Carrie Ellis, Robin Wright, Mandy Patinkin, Chris Sarandon, Wallace Shawn, Andre the Giant, Christopher Guest. Where is she? She's the witch. Carol Kane. Okay. I had to be sure. I'm not a witch. I'm your wife. I'm not sure I want to be that anymore. Do you think they'll do it? It'll be a miracle. Anyway, really great. And I look back and go, wow, I really missed it. I really missed out on it. Just one of those things. Being a boy, being stupid. And there we have it. What did I exclude? Lethal Weapon. Lethal Weapon, the first one, it kicked off the franchise. And it's really good. But honestly, I can't say the last time I watched it, to be honest. I know I've seen it a couple of times, but I don't know. Doesn't really stick with me in the same way as a lot of these other movies do. For example, another 1987 movie that was almost, I think, on, I included it here as kind of a notable or an honorable mention. Throw Mama from the Train. Danny DeVito, Billy Crystal. Owen doesn't have any friends, you stupid poop. I don't know why that line has always stuck with me. She clocks him with the frying pan. Kind of a dark movie, another black comedy, but the two of them, Danny DeVito and Billy Crystal, playing off each other. Top notch. 1988. So then, and you're going to say, well, wait a minute. You're excluding the big budgets in the franchises. Can't help it. It was my favorite then. It's my favorite now. I watch it at least once a year, usually at Christmas. Die Hard. It's it. It was then. It is now. It was the Bruce Willis show. I was a Moonlighting fan, and this was his first big movie. Like, big action movie. And it holds up, and it's great, and it is the greatest Christmas movie of all time, and seriously, just a great action flick. Because he wasn't like Rambo. He wasn't like, a Terminator or even Conan. He was very vulnerable, very human, made mistakes, got injured badly. And that was much more realistic. Plus the sense of humor, self-deprecation, the wit. It's great. And of course, Alan Rickman's first movie. Excluded. This is more just a personal exclusion because it's in the same year as Die Hard. That's the only reason it's excluded. Heathers. I can't tell you how many times I've watched Heathers. I've quoted it here on the show. It can't top Die Hard. Now, think about this. What else is in 1988? Movies like Big, one of the few Tom Hanks movies I really like. Beetlejuice, I've mentioned, love Tim Burton. Michael Keaton. This is Winona Ryder. What's not to love? Gina Davis, Alec Baldwin. Beetlejuice is like freaking great. Came out the same year as Die Hard. And then I think the last Eastwood movie that I went and saw in a movie theater also came out in 1988. That was the Deadpool. And what was notable for that initially was Guns N' Roses being on the soundtrack. Like that was like a big deal because like Clint Eastwood, legendary, Hollywood actor, director, and he's Dirty Harry's, all those things. And here you have Guns N' Roses. Just a nice little synthesis of cultures overlapping. And now we get to the last year of the 80s. Much like 1988, then and now, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. That's it. It is what it is. It's rewatchable at least annually. I've mentioned nothing but admiration for Keanu Reeves. Bill and Ted's is silly and is over the top, but it's also one of the best time travel movies because it makes sense, right? For all the absurdity and the silliness that's involved, it makes sense that these guys are going to grow up to like save the future and all that. It seems over the top, but somehow it all comes together. And what a great book report they did, their presentation to get the grade and to pass. It's wonderful. It's truly wonderful. And I don't think he's known for much else, but man, Billy the Kid, I don't know what I forget the line. Sometimes I say it perfectly, but now it's not coming to me, but they're like, Mr. the Kid, you are adjusting to the something of time travel. I know this line, but I cannot think of it at the moment. It'll come to me later, but it's so clever. And so I just have to put it there. It's timeless. What did I exclude? Last Crusade, another Indiana Jones, right? Got to exclude it. Batman was that year. Everyone loved Batman. Everyone. Major blockbuster. You also had Say Anything. Talk about like a Gen X flick of all Gen X flicks. And Parenthood came out in the same year. That's a lot of really great movies in 1989. So like I started high school in 88. So that's another piece of this too. Like 88, 89. Like these are all the movies of my high school years. When you're really like you start to go to movies a lot in middle school, like with your friends, like so independent of the stuff that your parents take you to, right? But by high school, you're going on dates or you're going with your buddies, whatever it is, and you're seeing the big flicks. It's really we weren't going for art films, right? We weren't going to some there's some place in New Haven, I forget the name of it, but that's where you could go see like, hey, there's this French film. I didn't want to go see that. I did for like a minute in like the 90s. So I'm going to go and watch these movies from some unknown French auteur, and it's in black and white, but it's a narrative tale and blah. I like stuff that blows up. I'll be perfectly honest. Do I enjoy a nice small film? Of course I do. But during this time, nah. Give me silly, give me crazy, give me over the top. I was less interested in the kind of rooted things, right? So those are my favorites. So if I, again, taking my opinion now, it's The Private Eyes, The Road Warrior, Blade Runner, Trading Places, Ghostbusters, Clue, Big Trouble in Little China, The Princess Bride, Die Hard, and Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. That's the list. And I own all of those movies with the exception of I don't have a copy of Trading Places or Clue. All the other ones I own. I actually own Time Bandits, and I had Lost Boys. My wife a couple of years ago, because it's movie topics, I'm going to bring it up, right? So my wife had a colleague at one of the banking branches that she worked at. And this kid had never seen anything. Ever just meet one of those people that just haven't seen any movie that was classic ever? Now, some people don't grow up with movie watching families. I understand that. That's a thing. That's a phenomenon. Hadn't seen anything. So she took a nice array of 5 or 6 movies from our collection and let him borrow them. Lo and behold, either he quit or got fired or got transferred. I forget exactly. Maybe she left the company. I don't know what it was. She never got the movies back. My copy of Tombstone was amongst them. Because she goes, what are your favorite movies if I were to recommend someone? Oh, I'm like, well, I didn't know she was giving out the... Anyway, I have another copy of Tombstone now, but I have a lot of these movies, and I definitely have all the Spielberg and Lucas stuff, because how can you not? And I have Heather's. So what are your favorite movies? When you think about the 80s, what are the movies? Are they basically some of these? What are the ones that maybe flew under the radar that didn't even think about, didn't even mention, maybe wasn't a big blockbuster, but you remember clearly and go, my favorite movie was, I don't know, some random little thing. And that's okay too. Was it The Adventures of Max Dugan was a movie I remember seeing a bunch of times. The Benji movies. Remember those? I saw every Benji movie. There's certainly some Muppet movies that are in there that I saw so many times. Yeah, there's movies like Labyrinth that could have very easily been on the list. The Dark Crystal definitely at the time, which was nightmare fuel, but also kind of cool. So many things. The 80s were a really unique time. So that's why I think so many of these movies are being remade. I mean, I do think to a certain extent it is lazy, but I also get the appeal, which is hey, these Gen Xers loved these movies. Their kids are really going to love it if we give them their own version of it. And I get that compulsion, but it's also when we're talking about the superhero movies, they're going to recast so many of those characters. I mean, that's why the whole, Tom Holland being with Tobey Maguire and being with Andrew Garfield, why that worked, right? Because that character has had multiple iterations. Christopher Reeve, I mentioned last week, if he, were still available, I'm sure he'd be doing some old man Superman, or who knows, maybe he'd be Lex Luthor, whatever it is. I mean, obviously I know that, his health is a reason that he couldn't continue doing stuff, but let's say that accident didn't happen. You might have multiple Superman in a movie because the stories themselves are strong. The characters are strong. I have definitely been waiting for a sequel or a remake to Last Starfighter, though. Come on now, Hollywood, that's the one you got to get on. Get on that. Don't remake the John Hughes movies. We don't need another Breakfast Club. Only way I want another Breakfast Club is if it is a reunion. That would be interesting to me. That would be interesting. But it had to be done right. I don't want all their kids are in detention. That's just silly. I'd rather they got together and it's the reunion and they sneak into the library and, they talk about stuff the same way they did. Anyway, I'm just spitballing. Nevertheless, what are your favorite 80s movies? What do you agree with? What do you disagree with? What did I miss? I'm sure there's something. Or you just want to let me know, hey, you should watch X, Y, and Z, because I'm always open to suggestions. Let me know. How do you let me know? You can email me at stuckinthemiddlepod@yahoo.com. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at StuckPodX. Head on over to the Facebook page, Stuck in the Middle, a Gen X podcast. Please like, comment, share, leave 5-star reviews, and most importantly, please subscribe to the podcast. So until next time, later, slackers.